I was leading a mission in Afghanistan when the notification popped up on my tablet. An email from Jennifer. At first, I thought it was just one of her usual check-ins until I read the subject line, Divorce Papers. In that moment, the desert heat felt colder than anything I'd ever known. 8 years of marriage dismissed with a digital signature. She claimed irreconcilable differences and demanded the house, my car, and half of my military pension. I tried to call her just to understand why. When she finally answered, her words cut deeper than any battlefield wound. I deserve better, Ryan. I've wasted enough time on you. There I was, thousands of miles from home, risking my life while the woman I loved was tearing my world apart. But what Jennifer didn't know, I had installed security cameras before I left. And when I checked the footage, what I found changed everything. If you think getting divorce papers during deployment is bad, wait until you hear how I turned her betrayal into the biggest mistake of her life. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's about revenge served colder than the Afghan nights. When I met Jennifer, I was fresh out of officer candidate school. She worked at a local coffee shop in Fort Worth, and I still remember the way she smiled when I ordered the same black coffee every morning. She was warm, witty, and had this way of making everything around her seem less chaotic. We dated for about a year before I proposed. I was about to be stationed in El Paso, and I wanted to start this new chapter with her beside me. She said yes through tears. At the time, I believed they were tears of love. Our wedding was modest but meaningful. My parents loved her. My cousins welcomed her in like a sister, especially Derek, looking back, maybe a little too much. The first few years were good. She supported me through deployments, sent care packages, kept the house running. Every time I came back, she greeted me like a soldier returning from war, because that's exactly what I was. But somewhere around year 5, something changed. She stopped calling as often when I was away. When I was home, she seemed distracted, always on her phone, or out with friends. I chalked it up to stress, maybe loneliness. I even felt guilty, thinking maybe I hadn't done enough to make her feel secure while I was gone. I never imagined she was stepping out. Deployment number 3 was the toughest yet. I had just been promoted to captain and was leading a new team through one of the most volatile regions in the province. The work was nonstop, day in and day out. We faced threats most people only hear about in the news. And yet, in all that danger, the worst blow I received came not from the enemy, but from my own wife. The divorce papers hit like a sniper round, and the timing wasn't random. I could feel that in my gut. She filed just 2 months into my tour, right after our anniversary, knowing I'd be thousands of miles away and legally limited in how fast I could respond. What stung more than the betrayal was the detachment. Her message had no warmth, no regret, just a clinical list of demands. She wanted the house. She wanted the car. I'd worked 3 side jobs to pay off. She wanted half of my military pension, something I'd risked life and limb to earn. I called her from the base on a shaky satellite connection. It was early morning in Texas, but she answered with full makeup on, like she'd just come from somewhere. Her voice was cold rehearsed. She said, "It's over, Ryan. I deserve better. You're never here." And then she hung up. I sat there in the middle of the makeshift operations tent, unable to breathe. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about mission reports or supply logistics or troop movement. I was thinking about the woman I had trusted with everything now, treating me like a stranger. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept running through every memory, every moment. I thought we had something real. I thought maybe she had met someone new. Maybe this was a clean break, a new life, and I just needed to let her go. But deep down, something didn't add up. That's when my squad mate Taylor pulled me aside. He had noticed I hadn't been myself for days. When I told him what was going on, he looked at me and said, "Didn't you install that full house security setup last year? The one with cloud storage?" I blinked. I had. Right before deployment, I upgraded our system. Cameras in the hallway entry points and main rooms all synced to encrypted cloud access. At the time, it was just to keep her safe. Now, it might hold answers I didn't know I was even looking for. With Taylor's help, I used a secure line to access the system from the command center after hours. And that's when I opened a video clip from 3 weeks prior. One that started with Jennifer unlocking the front door and ended with a man I didn't recognize walking out of my bedroom. I watched that first video on a tiny screen, my hands shaking not from fear, but from a kind of rage I'd never felt before. Jennifer wasn't just moving on. She had turned our home into a revolving door. Over the next few hours, I combed through days, weeks of footage, different men, different nights, all under my roof. The same roof I'd worked overtime to pay for. The same bed we once shared now, desecrated like none of it ever mattered. But nothing prepared me for what I saw next. It was late at night in the footage. Jennifer sat on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. Then Derek walked in. My cousin, someone I grew up with, someone who stood by my side at my wedding. He wasn't just visiting. He was comfortable too. Comfortable. He kissed her like they'd been together for years. I felt sick. Betrayal from a stranger is one thing, but from family that cuts deeper than any knife. I couldn't stop watching, even though every second felt like pouring salt into an open wound. And then, the real bombshell dropped. One afternoon, Jennifer and Derek were sitting at the kitchen table laughing. I turned up the audio feed. That's when I heard Jennifer say, "Once the divorce is finalized, we'll sell the house and split the money. Plus, I'll get half his pension. It's like a retirement plan I didn't have to work for." Derek chuckled, replying, "Just make sure you play the victim card. Remember emotional abuse? It gets sympathy in court." They laughed like it was some inside joke, like ruining my life was entertainment, Jennifer added, and filing while he's deployed genius. He can't fight back from across the world. That was their plan all along. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart, it was an ambush. They had calculated every move, waiting until I was most vulnerable to strike. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like a fool. All those family barbecues where Derek smiled in my face. All those nights I told Jennifer I trusted her, even when my gut said something was off. But pity wasn't going to get me anywhere. I knew then I wasn't going to be their victim. I downloaded every clip, every conversation, every piece of evidence I could find. Taylor watched me in silence, probably wondering how I was holding it together. Truth was, I wasn't. But I also knew this wasn't a battle I could fight with anger alone. I needed strategy. I needed to outsmart them the way they thought they had outsmarted me. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I drafted an email to a military specialized attorney recommended by one of the senior officers. By morning, I had a response. "We need to talk, and you need to act fast." On a secure call, I laid everything out. The infidelity, the financial betrayal, the conspiracy to defraud me during deployment. The attorney didn't sound surprised. He'd seen spouses pull stunts like this before. But even he admitted, this is one of the more cold-blooded cases I've come across. He explained that filing for divorce during active deployment was a tactic designed to corner service members. But with the footage I had, things were about to backfire hard. That's when he asked, "Have you checked your joint accounts recently?" I hadn't. I was too focused on surviving missions, trusting Jennifer to handle things back home. With his guidance, I logged in and my stomach dropped. Thousands of dollars, gone credit cards, maxed out cards I didn't even remember approving. Loan applications in my name. Jennifer had been bleeding me dry for months, maybe longer. This wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud, and now it was time to turn the tide. The attorney began filing motions to freeze accounts, dispute fraudulent charges, and submit evidence of adultery and conspiracy. We built a case not just to defend against her divorce demands, but to go on the offensive. While Jennifer and Derek thought they were in control, I was quietly setting a legal trap they'd never see coming. There's a moment when pain stops feeling like pain and turns into something colder, sharper. That's where I was. I wasn't the heartbroken husband anymore. I was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. As the days passed in Afghanistan, I led missions by day and built my legal counterattack by night. Every time I watched Jennifer and Derek's smug faces on those recordings, I felt the fire inside me burn hotter. But this wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about survival. If I didn't fight smart, I'd come home to nothing but debt, disgrace, and a reputation ruined by their lies. The attorney worked fast. We filed injunctions to block Jennifer's access to remaining assets. He contacted creditors, flagging the fraudulent accounts. And most importantly, we prepared criminal charges. But the hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It was pretending everything was normal whenever I spoke to family. My parents called occasionally asking how I was holding up. They had no idea what Jennifer and Derek were plotting. To them, Derek was still the golden boy, the cousin everyone admired, and Jennifer. She had already started spinning her narrative. I heard through my sister that Jennifer was telling people I had become distant, that I was emotionally unavailable because of the military. She painted herself as the victim, saying she tried for years but couldn't live like a ghost in her own marriage anymore. It was almost impressive how quickly she twisted the story to gain sympathy. But I kept quiet. I knew timing was everything. Then came the breaking point. One night after a particularly brutal mission, I logged into the security system out of habit. What I saw made my blood run cold. Jennifer and Derek were in my living room, drinking champagne celebrating. Jennifer raised her glass and said, "To freedom and to finally getting what we deserve." Derek laughed, pulling her close. "By the time Ryan gets back, he'll be lucky if he has a dime to his name." That was it. No more hesitation. No more second guessing if I was doing the right thing. They had declared war on me, and I was done playing defense. The next morning, I authorized my attorney to proceed with full charges: fraud, theft, conspiracy. Adultery wasn't just a moral failing, it had legal weight in our state. We submitted the video evidence to the court under seal, making sure Jennifer wouldn't know what was coming until it was too late. But even with all that in motion, I couldn't shake the weight pressing down on me. At night, I'd stare at the ceiling of my barracks, wondering how I let it get this far. How did I miss the signs? How did I trust so blindly? I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, not just for my country, but for Jennifer. The missed birthdays, the anniversaries spent overseas, the years building a future I thought we shared. And now, that future was ash. My squad noticed the change in me. I was quieter, more focused, but in a dangerous way. Taylor tried to get me to talk, but what could I say that while we were dodging bullets out here? My own family had already stabbed me in the back. There's a saying in the Army, "Embrace the suck." It means accepting the hardship and pushing through. But this wasn't just the suck. This was betrayal at every level. 3 weeks before my deployment ended, I got word from my attorney. "Everything's filed. Warrants will be issued the moment you land stateside." I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. There was no turning back now. Jennifer's game was over. She just didn't know it yet. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not because I won, but because I knew justice was finally catching up to them. And when I stepped off that plane, I wasn't coming home to beg for answers or closure. I was coming home to finish what they started. When my boots hit American soil, I wasn't thinking about homecomings or parades. I was thinking about strategy. This wasn't over, not yet. I met my attorney, Mr. Lawson, the day after I landed. He was a former JAG officer, sharp, methodical, and as relentless as any commander I'd served under. He laid out everything like a battle map. We've frozen all joint accounts. The creditors are cooperating, and fraud investigations are underway. He slid a folder across the table. Jennifer's spending habits will bury her in court, especially with the video evidence. But Lawson wasn't done. We also subpoenaed Derek's employer. Turns out he used your address on some paperwork that ties him directly to the fraudulent activity. I couldn't help but smirk. Derek's arrogance had made my job easier. The plan was simple but brutal. First, let the criminal charges hit before Jennifer even had a chance to react. Next, use the mountain of evidence to crush her divorce claims. She wanted half of everything, but after proving infidelity, fraud, and conspiracy, she'd be lucky to walk away without a prison sentence. 2 days later, the knock came at Jennifer's door. While she was sipping her morning coffee, police officers served her with charges: felony, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit theft. I imagined the look on her face when they cuffed her. The same hands that signed my divorce papers, now restrained by cold steel. Derek wasn't far behind. His arrest at work caused a scandal that spread through our family like wildfire. I stayed silent. I didn't call anyone to explain. I let the facts speak for themselves. But the real satisfaction came during the first court hearing. Jennifer walked in dressed like she was attending a job interview. all innocent smiles and doe-eyed glances. When she saw me sitting calmly with Lawson, her face dropped. She wasn't expecting me to be there. She thought I'd still be scrambling powerless, like the man she planned to destroy. The judge reviewed the charges, flipping through pages of evidence. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The security footage played on the screen. There was Jennifer laughing with Derek, discussing how to milk the divorce for every penny. Jennifer's attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Jennifer? She went pale, her confident facade crumbling with every passing second. When the judge paused the video, he looked directly at her and said, "Mrs. Anderson, do you have any idea how serious this is?" She stammered something about being misunderstood. But it was too late. The evidence was airtight. Over the next few weeks, Lawson dismantled every false claim Jennifer had made. Her attempts to argue emotional abuse were exposed for the lies they were. The fraudulent charges she racked up were pinned solely on her and Derek. We negotiated a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial. Jennifer avoided jail time, but only because she agreed to full financial restitution. She walked away from the divorce with nothing. No house, no car, no claim to my pension. Just dead, a criminal record and a reputation in ruins. Derek wasn't so lucky. His employer fired him the moment the charges were public. And when I shared the footage with close family members, he was ostracized, cut off from every family gathering, every connection he once had. But I wasn't done yet. That house, our so-called dream home, it felt poisoned. Every corner held a memory tainted by betrayal. So I sold it. Used the money to pay off any lingering legal fees and set the rest aside for a fresh start. Before leaving town, I made one final stop. I visited my parents. I told them everything. At first, they were speechless. My mother cried, not just for me, but for the realization that someone they welcomed into the family could be so cruel. My father, a man of few words, simply nodded and said, "You handled this like a soldier, disciplined and precise." That meant more to me than anything. I didn't need revenge that ended in shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. I needed justice, clean, calculated, and undeniable. And that's exactly what I got. With Jennifer's schemes dismantled and Derek's life in shambles, I packed my bags and left Texas behind. Not as a broken man, but as someone who had survived a different kind of war. The day of the final hearing felt different. Not like a battle, but like a victory parade. I didn't need to march in. I had already won. Now it was just about watching the consequences unfold. Jennifer walked into the courtroom, her posture, stiff eyes darting everywhere except toward me. Gone was the confident woman who once thought she held all the cards. Now she looked like someone waiting for a sentence she knew was coming. Her lawyer did his best to soften the blow, arguing for leniency, painting Jennifer as someone who made mistakes out of emotional distress, but the judge wasn't buying it. Not after reviewing hours of footage and financial records that told a very different story. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked if I had anything to say before the ruling. I stood up calm, composed, and looked directly at Jennifer. I spent years believing marriage was built on trust, loyalty, and sacrifice. I began, while I was overseas risking my life. Jennifer wasn't just unfaithful, she was calculating, deceitful, and malicious. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. This wasn't a marriage that fell apart. This was an ambush. And today I'm here not out of anger, but to ensure accountability. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, her face flushed with shame, or maybe just the sting of being exposed. The judge nodded clearly, unmoved by any plea from her side. He finalized the divorce decree, granting me full ownership of the house, car, and clearing my name from all fraudulent debts. Then came the civil penalties tied to her criminal actions. Jennifer was ordered to repay every dollar she had stolen or misused. She avoided prison, but only because I agreed to the restitution deal. Truth be told, I preferred watching her live with the consequences every single day. As court adjourned, Jennifer tried to approach me. Maybe to apologize, maybe to plead for some form of understanding, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked past her without a word because she didn't deserve one. Outside the courthouse, Derek wasn't there. He was busy dealing with his own fallout, jobless, disgraced and disowned by the family he once thought would always have his back. Word spread fast. Relatives who once admired Derek now spoke his name like a curse in Jennifer. She became a cautionary tale in our community. The woman who tried to outsmart a soldier and lost everything. In the weeks that followed, I wrapped up what little remained in Texas. Selling the house felt like shedding old skin, a necessary step to leave behind a place that no longer felt like home. I moved to Colorado, drawn by the mountains and the promise of quiet. It wasn't just about starting over. It was about reclaiming my peace. But even after settling in, I couldn't shake the thought of how easily things could have ended differently if I hadn't installed those cameras. If Taylor hadn't reminded me to check if I had trusted blindly until it was too late. That realization fueled something in me. I began volunteering with a nonprofit dedicated to helping military personnel safeguard their finances and personal lives during deployments. Too many soldiers return home to find not just emotional betrayal, but financial ruin orchestrated by those they trusted most. Sharing my story wasn't easy at first. It meant reliving the worst chapters of my life. But if it meant protecting even one person from falling into the same trap, it was worth it. One afternoon, after giving a talk to a group of young service members, a lieutenant approached me and said, "Captain Anderson, your story isn't just about revenge, it's about resilience." And he was right. This wasn't just about punishing Jennifer or Derek. It was about standing up when life tried to knock me down and refusing to stay there. I never heard from Jennifer again after the settlement. Last I knew, she was working 2 jobs trying to pay off her debts. Derek moved out of state, likely hoping to escape the shadow of his own disgrace. As for me, I found peace not in forgetting what happened, but in knowing I took control when it mattered most. And sometimes that's the best kind of revenge. Living well while those who wronged you are left to face the ruins they built for themselves. It's been 2 years since that chapter of my life closed. Sometimes when I look back, it feels like watching someone else's story. A soldier blindsided by betrayal, forced to fight a war on 2 fronts. But that was me, and surviving it taught me lessons no battlefield ever could. In Colorado, life moves at a different pace. The mountains don't care about your past. They just stand tall, reminding you that resilience isn't loud. It's steady. I rebuilt not just my finances or career, but my trust, starting with myself. I still volunteer, speaking to young soldiers about protecting what matters most when they're thousands of miles from home. Not every enemy wears a uniform. Sometimes they smile at you across the dinner table. People often ask me if I'm bitter, if I still think about Jennifer and Derek. The truth, I don't need to. They're living the consequences of their choices every day. And I'm living proof that you can turn betrayal into strength if you keep your head clear and your heart steady. I used to believe loyalty was enough to safeguard any relationship, but now I know loyalty without boundaries is just vulnerability, waiting to be exploited. If there's one thing I tell anyone listening, it's this: never assume that trust means leaving yourself unprotected. Whether in war or in life, you prepare for the worst, not because you expect it, but because you deserve to be ready if it comes. I don't regret installing those cameras. I don't regret fighting back with evidence instead of emotion. And I certainly don't regret walking away from people who showed me exactly who they were. Justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It's a signed court order. It's a debt collector calling the person who thought they could ruin you. It's peace of mind when you lay your head down at night. I found mine. Not by winning a war against Jennifer and Derek, but by refusing to let their betrayal define the rest of my life. Because in the end, revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about rebuilding yourself stronger than they ever expected. And that's exactly what I did.